I'm Mark Turner, and I'm the Extension Wildlife Specialist at Oklahoma State University. And you might be wondering what happens to wildlife habitat following a wildfire, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. A few weeks ago, much of Oklahoma saw historic fire weather, and there were several major fires that hit several areas across the state. And today we're standing behind something that was burned very close to Stillwater just a couple weeks ago. And as you can see, it's already starting to green back up. A lot of the trees are already budding out. Obviously though, the effects depend on the severity that hit a particular area. The effects of wildfire on various wildlife species is really context dependent, and it depends on the exact species we're talking about, the severity of the fire, as well as the scale that it occurred. So for species that live most of their lives in closed canopy forest conditions, such as the wood thrush, which is a songbird, if there's a really hot fire that comes through and it kills a lot of overstory trees, certainly there's going to be negative effects for that species. For other species, such as northern bobwhite, more commonly referred to as quail, if you have a hot fire come through that kills a lot of cedars within an area, certainly those cedar encroached areas may not be as beneficial to quail. And at least, over the next several years, you're going to start to see some grasses and shrubs and forbs coming back into those areas, and that long term is going to have benefits to quail populations. For other species like wild turkey, the results are a little bit mixed. So certainly turkeys don't like areas that are really thick, dense cedars, and so if you have fire come through and open those areas up, that can be beneficial. On the other hand, if you have cedar encroachment underneath a forest, especially in a place where roost trees are relatively limited, that really hot fire coming through and killing those overstory trees because of that cedar encroachment, that's certainly going to be a negative. And in fact, some areas turkeys might have to move on from that property because there are no more roost trees remaining. So again, it really just depends on the wildlife species you're talking about, certainly the severity of the fire. What I'm standing behind here, there may be a few overstory trees that were killed, but for the most part, the species of trees that we have in Oklahoma, especially here in the cross timbers, post oak and blackjack oak, those are fire adapted tree species, and so most of those are going to be okay from the fire, and certainly those that are top killed, most of them are going to resprout, and we're going to have new trees establishing themselves in those areas that were killed. So the severity matters, the scale also matters. Certainly with a wildfire, one of the negatives is the scale that they happen oftentimes is much too large for a lot of wildlife species. So for something like a quail, if their entire home range burns up, that's going to be a negative for them, even though quail are fire adapted and they respond really well to prescribed fire practices. So certainly we're encouraging folks to get out there and consider learning more about using prescribed fire on their property. For landowners whose properties were burned in a recent fire or even one several years ago, there are some things that you can do to maybe help mitigate the response. Of course, if you had a bunch of overstory trees killed, certainly, in most cases, you're going to have those trees reestablish themselves either through stump sprouting or through seeds that are present on the property. So it's not really necessary to go out and plant trees in most cases following a wildfire event. The main thing that I would encourage folks to do is monitor the vegetation response and take advantage of the conditions that you have to keep ahead of some issues like cedar encroachment and encroachment of other woody species. So certainly if you had a wildfire this year, you're not going to be able to burn it this year, but potentially, in the next couple years, you can look at getting fire back into those systems and then maintaining prescribed fire in such a way that, hopefully is going to reduce the severity of fire over time. There's a lot of benefits that can come from prescribed fire, and a lot of the beneficial things that just happen from fire in general, we can apply fire in a prescribed, more controlled manner and see those benefits without the risk to communities and people's property. So certainly I think the take home from this is that fire is beneficial to a lot of wildlife species in Oklahoma. We certainly have a lot of fire adapted species here, but applying prescribed fire as opposed to waiting for a wildfire to occur is a much more sustainable way for us to manage these systems. Following a wildfire, especially one that's of a large scale, you certainly, during that time period immediately after the fire, are going to tend to see animals moving from the area that was burned into areas that were unburned. But certainly it really depends on the species. Things like deer, they oftentimes would move away from something that was burned, but as soon as you get good rain, this area right behind me right here is going to be very attractive to deer. A lot of fresh forbs are coming up, and those are going to be highly nutritious plants. So you really have great forage availability for deer here, and so certainly I wouldn't expect animals to be off your property for long. Now again, if you removed roost trees, for example, that's going to be more of an issue, but for a species like white-tailed deer, I'd expect them to be right back in there as soon as things start greening up after the fire, because these plants are going to be much more nutritious for them.